and good afternoon. This is Atiba Buchanan and David Seaton. You are listening to and watching Humanity in the Headlines. Thank you for joining us today. We are glad to be here. We're glad you are here with us, family. As always, we have a power-packed hour scheduled for you today. We've got a lot of things that we're going to try and dissect and to break down. You're welcome to give us a call at 708-223-8953. Again, 708-223-8953. If you'd like to join the conversation, you're welcome to watch on Facebook Live and type questions there, comments. We'd love to have that information, and we'd love to answer your questions live on air. Again, we're just ready to do what we do. So, Dave, how are you, first of all?
Loving this weather today.
Absolutely.
It is a beautiful Saturday in Chicago.
It is.
Long overdue.
It is, especially for April.
Right.
You know, early April.
Right.
So needless to say, anybody that knows anything about David you would not lose a nickel if you bet that he was going to be on somebody's grill today.
Exactly.
And that he's had things marinating, preparing for this for at least 48 hours. I know this dude.
Marinating since Wednesday.
Exactly. And he can grill too. So he's who I actually call when I need tips. I got a rib recipe that I got exclusively from him. So I just had to get that out just to acknowledge this beautiful weather today. So let's get down to it, man. Before we get started, I'm gonna have my man Earl, Mr. Winfrey here, play a little sound for us today to kind of set up what we're going to talk about this first half hour, Dave. Go ahead, Mr. Winfrey. We greatly appreciate it.
We assembled here today are issuing a new decree to be heard in every city, in every foreign capital, and in every hall of power. Day forward, a new vision will govern our land. From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first. Every decision on trade, on taxes, on immigration, on foreign affairs benefit American workers and American families. We must protect our borders from the ravages of other countries, making our products, stealing our companies, and destroying our jobs. Protection will lead to great prosperity and strength. Fight for you with every breath in my body, and I will never, ever let you down.
So, Dave, my question to you today, to open up our conversation, what happened to America first?
First.
Is it?
When he dropped those bombs on Syria, the Raytheon stock, the people who make those missiles, those Tomahawk missiles, went up the very next day. Who owned stock in Raytheon?
Go. Right.
Donald Trump.
Right. So it's Donald Trump first.
Argue that he's putting Raytheon first. Therefore, the workers of Raytheon, therefore, the stock of Raytheon. So
that's what it is.
First.
There it is. So that's what we're talking about today, is what happened to America first. Now, let me just say my own individual thoughts, because that's what Republicans do. They do messaging well. Argue against America first. What could you possibly say without sounding unpatriotic that you would have that you have a problem or an issue with America first? I get it. There are certain things that I like the premise of America first. So on its face, I will admit that that's not a bad thing. And again, Donald Trump and his administration for coming up with that, because those are the things that resonate with these people. However, the devil was always in the details. So it's one thing, again, to campaign, and it is another thing to govern. So let's kind of talk about the differences between Donald Trump, the campaigner, and Donald Trump, the president, and his policies. What is first about America in bombing Syria and in bombing in Afghanistan? And I'm trying to figure out at what point does our president tell us what the plan is?
To get a plan, everything that he's done is being just shooting from the hip. And when he gets the visceral reaction from the crowd that he likes, that's the direction that he goes. The danger here, though, because saying America first, or saying that you're going to put America first, the underlying foundation of putting America first is that you have to have a safe, stable world, stable planet. And part of putting America first is making sure that we don't have rogue nations like North Korea with nukes, or that we don't have unrest in the Middle East. Has deconstructed, for the most part, the Secretary of State's office. The only person that's in there is Rex Tillerson and the deputy secretary under him. That complete department is not being staffed. So he's actually, in his mind, he's thinking, we're saving money by not hiring all these people in the State Department. We're saving all this money. He's just looking at the bottom line. We're going to save all this money by not paying all these people, but he's actually putting the world, and by extension, the United States, in a more dangerous situation by having a more dangerous world all living and have to suffer the consequences of his erratic decision making.
Okay, well, let me play devil's advocate for a bit here, because one thing I want to do is be as fair as possible conversation and in our dissection of what this administration is doing. Dropping a bomb on ISIS participants.
On the surface, nothing is wrong with it. We're defending ourselves against what Republicans like to call an existential threat. That there's no threat to the existence of the United States from ISIS. That argument aside, you're talking about $314 million worth of munitions that were dropped in Syria. At the same time, while he's cutting domestic programs here, Meals on Wheels, other programs that cost far less. On someone, the money that you spent on that bomb are gone forever. So now you have to go back and rebuild whatever you destroyed. You have to compensate the population some kind of way for the loss of life. From the macro point of view, you drop a bomb, the bomb is gone, and whatever you spent on and whatever it destroyed is gone. As opposed to taking that money, doing humanitarian efforts in the Middle East and trying to open up schools to educate the local population and investing is so that you can have those local people take back their land and you can deconstruct ISIS that way. I would argue that investing in the people that are being subjugated to ISIS in the Middle East is a far better expenditure of our money than just arbitrarily dropping bombs.
First of all, that was very eloquently put. And just as you were talking, I had 1,000,001 things just pouring into my head, because the first thing I thought of, because I don't want to get too far off topic, is that we would make for our urban centers. So again, it is so difficult to reach people and to get across that chasm of an impasse, because that's ultimately, as progressives, our thinking, our ideology is women getting abortions, as opposed to destroying all of the abortion clinics. Why don't we provide women with the resources, educationally, economically,
right,
so that they don't have to go to that alternative? That is the way that you reduce abortions, not by completely cutting off their options.
Right.
And we have these, and that is the crux of our same argument, conservatives, over and over again. I think what you just said was brilliant, because very few people talk about in the Middle East. One is take out Saddam Hussein. I mean, that's not a form of investment.
Right. It's really an argument, and this tenet can be applied across everyone who's listening to this. This is a life tenet that can be applied to whether we're talking about the Middle East, whether we're talking about Donald Trump, whether we're talking about conservative, progressive. It's cost versus investment. Spend the same amount of money. You can have a $100,000 cost, and that money can be gone, or you can take that same $100,000 and invest it and get a return on your investment. Bernie Sanders and some that would call the progressive left talk about getting free education. Americans look at that as a cost. We can't afford to pay for people to get free education. People on the left would say that we can't afford not to because that's an investment. If I spend $100,000 to give somebody an education K through 12 and then 4 years of college, that person is now going to enter the workforce. They're going to be a productive member of society, and they're going to pay back over 30 years 3 to 4 times as much that we invested in tax revenue. You can take that same $100,000 as a cost or an investment. It really just boils down to how you look at it, and how you look at it is going to be based on your priorities.
Absolutely. So let's go over to Syria for a little bit, because we had dropped 59 bombs,
59 Tomahawk missiles,
and
that all hit all the targets.
Right. And the very next day, the same airport was up and running. Now, he was able to do that without the authorization of Congress, and we touched on this last week. But that brings me back to my first question. You know, I haven't been into politics for a really long time, but I still do remember those monumental moments where the president, be it Reagan, be it Clinton, be it President Obama, where they came out in front of the American people, what the plan was. And it frustrates me to no end that has yet to happen. I was watching one of my second favorite show next to Humanity in the Headlines, Joy Reid, today, on MSNBC, and she used a word that I think was the best word I've heard to date to sum up the whole Trump administration. She said, there is an unseriousness to it. And that hit me like a ton of bricks, because every day I look at the Trump administration, be it the things that he tweets, be it the decisions that he makes, the authority that he delegates, I am stunned at the unseriousness of it. And what do you think it does for us on the world stage at this point?
Well, what you just said is I don't even think most people have even conceptualized where we are. What President Trump, and I still have to say, putting those two words together.
Right.
What President Trump tweets, the world is getting, the window the world has into U.S. foreign policy, absent of a serious presentation being made by our president into U.S. policy, is a 160 character or less tweet. 140. I'm sorry. 140. That's even worse. That's 20 characters less. but that we are in. I mean, social media certainly is a powerful tool in the 21st century. But that the president of the United States, that's how we get the information. That's our window into his thinking. What he tweets. That in of itself should just send a shudder down the spine of everyone listening to this and everyone thinking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about that he has tweeted or has allowed to come out. He's talked about bombing the S out of ISIS. I've seen some of the generals' remarks, asking what they thought of it, and I've heard words like unprofessional, unpresidential. And these are all words that surprise. And I guess that's what amazes me week to week, is that as surprised as I am that he says and does the things that he does, none of it really is a surprise, because it's not as if he tricked us. It's not as if he duped us. Who he was. And he has exemplified that week after week after week. And the only thing that I find surprising is how he's been able to maintain his base.
He's lost a lot of his alt-right base with this intervention in Syria.
And he's on the verge of losing more if he's seriously pondering getting rid of Steve Bannon.
I would agree. I would also take it a step further and say that if we get embroiled in North Korea at all, that would be the end of any possibility of a second term for Donald Trump.
Let me ask you this, and again, I try to ask questions from a point of view from someone who may not be as initiated in these things. Why is it North Korea can't have a nuclear weapon? Let me frame this for you. Who does have nuclear weapons? The States, right?
The United States, the United Kingdom, Russia,
and
France, Pakistan, and India.
Okay, all right. That gave me a little relief because I wasn't aware Pakistan and India had nuclear weapons, and everybody's cool with that. Everybody agrees with them having them.
It's a little bit.
And I would assume Saudi Arabia
have nukes.
Okay, so the reason I asked that is
Israel, but
Israel.
You have to put Israel in air quotes because they are not part of the G6 Council in the United Nations. We gave them nukes, and that's kind of hush hush. It's kind of off the books.
Right.
But Israel has nuclear weapons also.
So the reason, because here's what I was thinking, as I didn't know of any countries that were majority people of color. And all I could say, and all I wondered was, why is it okay for the United States to have them, for Russia, for France, United Kingdom, and so forth? But every time, Iran or whoever wants to get a nuclear weapon, it is a problem. I'm just asking that on its face. I'm sure it's more nuanced than that, but I'm just trying to ask because I was watching one analyst, and he's like a counterterrorism analyst, but he was trying to speak from North Korea's point of view, but I don't think he realized the level of truth that he was speaking. And what he was saying was, from North Korea's point of view, the United States upends dictators. Muammar Gaddafi, whether it was Saddam Hussein,
right,
whether we're looking to get rid of Assad. And the one thing that those countries all had in common was the lack of nuclear capability.
Right.
So from North Korea's point of view, in their desire to remain sovereign, is their need, their necessity to defend themselves from a place like the United States with a nuclear weapon. And I think to date, that's the one thing that's kept us out of North Korea. Because to keep it real, if you look up 50 years from now, and Korea be the next South America or South Africa,
right,
a vacation spot or something.
Right.
Right. So again, on its face, then what am I missing? What is the average person missing in that articulation?
I would argue, and I think that the countries that have nuclear weapons would argue that responsibility to make sure that rogue states don't become nuclear capable. When you look at somebody like Kim Jong-un or his father Kim Jong-il, if they have nuclear weapons, the probability that they would use them, completely irrational, erratic standpoint, the possibility that they would use them is so much greater. Now, one could also argue that the United States is in a hypocritical position, having been the only country to have dropped nuclear weapons in the history of in the history of the planet. I hate to use this kind of this might sound like a very infantile example, but I would no more trust North Korea weapon than I would trust a small child with a 9mm handgun. I wouldn't give my 16-year-old daughter a handgun and tell her, yeah, do whatever it is that you want with it, and just trust that she would be responsible with it, regardless to her level of responsibility. Just that the power that I'm giving to a 16-year-old by handing my daughter a 9mm handgun is too great. And again, Kim Jong-un has shown that he is erratic, he is unpredictable, he has a thirst for attention. He is really the North Korean. He's the North Korean equivalent of Donald Trump. Having said,
Right.
having said that, and that should, and again, I'm sure the world is uncomfortable with him having access to our nuclear arsenal. Having said that, though, for that reason alone, because we know the power that we have, that's the reason we really can't trust rogue nations' weapons, because we know they would use them. The United States and Russia, we had in a previous conversation a couple of weeks ago, 80% of the nuclear arsenal of the planet, which is about 14,000, is about 7,000 per United States and Russia for each country. We've never had an accident with the United States and or Russia accidentally dropping a nuclear bomb on another country.
Sure.
So that sounds hypocritical, but the United States and Russia, because they have the most, they ultimately have the responsibility to police the rest of the world.
And again, and that's why I wanted to pose that question, because I know I'm not the only person that's thinking that, again, especially on the surface. So what's going on with that? So let's bring it back to Trump. Let's bring it back to home. What things are we missing this week? The mother of all bombs being dropped in lieu of 59 tomahawks being dropped, in lieu of the tensions between us and North Korea. What domestically in the Trump administration are we not talking about that we should be?
I think it went under the radar for a lot of people that the Republicans actually gave a bill that he signed that completely defunds. Planned Parenthood no longer gets federal funds.
I think in that bill, what they did was allow the states to refuse the funding, federal funding, right?
De facto, right? Because
Right.
because Republican governors are then going to take that as an excuse to deny the funds, and then the Planned Parenthood offices in those states won't get it. Kind of weaseled his way around
Exactly.
it, but went under the radar for a lot of people this week.
And we know, let's talk about what we do know about federal funds and Planned Parenthood. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, that not a nickel of taxpayer funds. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Right. So, and only 3% of what Planned Parenthood does is abortions. Everything else would be things like health screenings for women. Now, a lot of women that do not have access to a doctor, a regular physician that can go get those types of services at Planned Parenthood. So then what does the passing of this bill say to those women, those Americans, those American first women?
It tells them, again, that the Republican Party, exactly what they always said they would do once they got both houses of Congress and the White House, is that they were going to enact their ideological agenda regardless to how it affects everyday people.
You're almost bleeding into our next segment, but I'm gonna hold you back.
I mean,
we're this close. But
if you are a woman out there and you either don't have a job that doesn't provide for health insurance, or you have Medicaid, if you're in any one of those three situations, there are an innumerable number of circumstances where you might find yourself needing to go to a Planned Parenthood facility. If it's for nothing but a pap smear, if it's for nothing but birth control, if it's for nothing but just your yearly exam with your OBGYN. There, mammograms, like you mentioned earlier. Even men go to Planned Parenthood. So by defunding Planned Parenthood, and again, that's the other thing that's such a contradiction, because you would think that Republicans would like Planned Parenthood because it's private. Privatization.
Right.
We'll just write a check and you guys do whatever you want to do. But again, because they have been co-opted, bleeding into the next segment, because a lot of this comes down to let's just be 100% blunt. A lot of the decisions and a lot of the policy positions that Republicans align themselves with are steeped and based in their religious beliefs. So the entire country is being held hostage, small group of majority white men, because of their religious beliefs. And that on its face, regardless to what your religious persuasion is not democratic.
Break. again, eloquently put, because that is taking us to our next segment, but we'll pick up from there in a second. You are watching and listening to Humanity in the Headlines, and we'll be right back. We are back. Again, you are listening to and watching Humanity in the Headlines. I'm your host, Atiba Buchanan. Joining me, as always, Mr. David Seaton, permanent co-host, and I'm so glad to have him today, as we are just really just tossing it back and forth. A lot to digest this week. There's still a lot we haven't even touched on yet, especially with the Trump administration. We could talk about Jared Kushner, talk about Ivanka Trump, and again, all of the conflicts of interest that are tied and saddled to both of them. But we're going to talk about something else today. We're going to talk about the right. The Republican Party has been co-opted by the religious right, and we believe that it has, and we're going to talk about that today, and then explain why that's a problem. So Dave, you brought this to my attention early in the week with two stories. So I'm going to go ahead and let you set those up. If you could talk about the two stories that happened in two different states that kind of set up why we ended up talking about this today.
The first story is in North Carolina. The legislature there, and anyone who's been keeping up on North Carolina knows that they had a huge issue going on in the state because they were trying to get LGBT people were trying to get access to bathrooms, and they wanted to go to the bathroom based on the gender with which they identified. Issue that was going on. They finally relented. It had to do mostly with the financial pressure from the business community, as always. Didn't come down to it ideologically capitulating that they had made a wrong choice. It came down to they were losing revenue. They capitulated.
And they lost a lot of it. I mean, we cannot overstate that.
They lost billions of dollars.
Yes.
And now, in their wisdom, they have decided that they want to take their fight forward, and they want to try and make gay marriage illegal in the state of North Carolina. Which is kind of two sides of the same coin, or two.
Right.
It's dealing with the same community. And now it's just you can go to whatever bathroom you want to go to, but now you can't get married. And the Supreme Court has already ruled on this by not allowing homosexuals and or lesbians to get married. That's a violation of the clause in the Constitution that everyone gets treated
equal protection.
The equal protection clause. Thank you. I was going to say the Establishment Clause, but the equal protection clause.
Yep.
And I can't remember what state this was in, but I think it was Georgia. Georgia is considering passing a law to allow churches to form their own private police departments. And when I read these two stories, the question that I asked myself is, what is going on in these Southern Republican states,
right,
that they are so beholden to, that the intersection and the just religion and the state are just so tightly interwoven in these Southern states. And when I say Southern states, I'm talking about Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, those states. They are.
So when you go back to the North Carolina proposed law, they even cited scripture, didn't they?
Oh yes.
If you could,
they said something about Adam. Basically, they were saying the old joke of is God made Adam and Eve, he didn't make Adam and Steve. It was something
right.
It was something very close to that.
But the foundation of their argument was couched in Scripture.
In Genesis, yes.
Right. So, and the reason I bring that up is clearly, like, I don't know about your civics classes. You know, mine taught me about a thing called separation of church and state. And does that ever apply to them? Like, how is that so misunderstood by them or by us? Who's dropping the ball here?
Republicans and conservatives would assert that their First Amendment protection of freedom of religion as well. So they are free to express their religious beliefs that are based in Christianity. And that if someone has an opposing point of view, that by acknowledging that point of view, that their First Amendment rights are being trampled. But you are correct. The Constitution very plainly says that there is no established religion for the United States. And even historically, it's ironic that the people that the imperialists who came from Europe to establish this country, one of the things they were trying to flee from in Europe was one of the things that they wanted to establish here was religious freedom.
Right. Because
in Europe, it was ruled by a monarchy. So it was the monarchy, the monarchs were Christians. So if you were in the state, you had to be a Christian because the king was a Christian. So they came here so that you could have freedom to practice whatever religion you wanted. And now in less than 3 centuries, it's being perverted into this slowly creeping of religion into our everyday politics.
Right. So that's what blows my mind with this. I can recall the debate, but it was really more of an argument I was having with a gentleman because I said, this isn't a Christian nation. And he lost his mind. He was like, what do you mean this isn't a Christian nation? I'm like, this isn't a Christian nation. What happens if you don't believe in God? Significant portion of the population doesn't. What about their rights? What about their representation? And to me, separation of church and state makes perfect sense. And I say this because the things that I believe as a Christian, it's not up to me to import upon anyone else for them to believe it, especially as law. That's what blows my mind when I read that article that you sent about the whole thing about gay marriage. I mean, here's what I feel about it. And you know, I'm just going to break it down. That marriage as it stands, period, is really just a civil union in this country. Whether whoever's getting married, before my wife and I walk down the aisle, and we got married there. That we were married before we had a ceremony, but that was a civil union, and that's basically what we afford people. So my point in saying that is, when you go down to City Hall, there wasn't a religious test we had to pass. We believed in God. No one asked us any of those questions. It had absolutely nothing to do with God. So again, when we get married, that's why to me it doesn't matter if it's a man and a man or a woman and a woman, because it is their civil right to have that. Now, if you want to say, well, you can't make us marry a man and woman in our church, I would support that. They have a right then to have whatever their religion be and whatever tenets and laws that they have in their religion to exercise those things. But when you're talking about the country, again, that's why the separation of church and state has to be there. And we've had marriage equality now for 3-4 years.
Correct.
Diminished my marriage to my wife.
Right. Exactly. And that was the argument. The original argument was if you allow gay people to get married, that somehow it was going to diminish the sanctity of heterosexual marriage. And that has certainly been disproven, not only in this country, but in other countries.
Right.
Ironically, Russia right now, there are stories all over the internet of Chechnya arresting gay men and throwing them in jail and beating them and torturing them and in effect punishing them for even living a homosexual lifestyle. So the fact that religious people want to impose their religious beliefs, because I want to make a distinction. You said If I'm a Christian, and what about the people who are not Christians? You don't even have to go that deep. You can go within one denomination of Christianity. You can go within the Baptist denomination of Christianity and go to 3 different churches, and you'll get 3 different interpretations of the same thing.
Yes.
Of the same scripture. So we don't even have to get all deep about Christian, non-Christian, atheist, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, none of that. You can,
right.
Again,
there's not central agreement even in Christianity.
There's not a central tenet of agreement within the denominations of Christianity, which is why you have different denominations, because there were people that said, hey, I believe you need to get water to be baptized, and somebody else said, no, you can just sprinkle them. I mean, so
right.
You start getting into matters of how you are going to live your life, and then try to get a consensus from the church. Good luck.
And then here's the other hypocrisy in it, the other thing that we have to talk about, because the only religion for a voice in this, because how many times have you and I heard, ain't gonna be no Sharia law here?
Right, right.
So Lord knows Muslims can't impose their religious views into our laws. So why is it Christianity is able to do so?
I would go so far as to say that the far right fundamentalist Christians that are in our government are attempting to create a theocracy, which again is so hypocritical, because they are the exact same people who talk about Sharia law in the Middle East, and talk about how those countries are not as modern and not as respectful of human rights because they are theocracies. We have a de facto theocracy here. De facto theocracy, and it goes back to the Reagan years, where the Christian right got amped up, getting together with Reagan when they were first trying to overturn Roe versus Wade. And again, it's easy to believe, because again, a lot of people, it wasn't that long ago. Ronald Reagan, the election that put Ronald Reagan into the office happened in November of 1979. Roe versus Wade happened in 1973. Less than a decade old when Reagan went into office. And the Christian right has been doing whatever they can to chip away little by little, trying to assert mainstream Christian into mainstream society through force of law, which again is not democracy.
Goodness, that's a lot. You know what? I need 2 minutes to gather myself. Well, we're going to take just one more quick break. We got about 10 minutes left. We're going to bring it home when we come back. We thank you for listening to and watching Humanity in the Headlines. We'll be right back. We are in the home stretch of Humanity in the Headlines. I am your host, Atiba Buchanan, David Seaton, the brilliant mind of Mr. David Seaton, and we are in it today. So again, you are welcome to comment on Facebook Live. You are welcome to give us a call at 708-223-8953. Again, 708-223-8953. So, Dave, let me ask you this, because again, we have so much going on this week. Over under on someone from the Trump administration being arrested for collusion with Russia.
Very interesting that you asked that question, because I did read an article over the weekend that is saying that they are predicting that the first arrests are going to happen this week.
Same article. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Because
isn't it becoming clearer and clearer that where there's smoke, there's fire?
That was their whole argument with Hillary Clinton.
Right. I mean, we are beyond the point now of benefit of the doubt. I mean, don't get me wrong. People are certainly innocent until proven guilty. But oh my goodness, it doesn't look good. And can we start with him? He is now a registered double agent. Can you imagine? Because
registered foreign agent.
Foreign agent. Thank you. Foreign agent. And I appreciate that correction. I'm thinking about the election, and I'm thinking about when Comey came out and came out with that bogus update. We just want to update you that we're investigating Hillary Clinton's emails. Like 2 weeks.
2 weeks before the election.
Right. And then with him doing that, if 6 months prior, it became common knowledge from the FBI or from the intelligence community that possible collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. Like, how did that information not get leaked? Because that's what frustrates me. It's not as if that investigation has started almost a year ago.
Here's the thing that everybody's missing with that. I'm glad you said it like that. I'm glad you set it up like that. Everyone who's listening to my voice, please don't miss this. The reason why the FBI didn't comment about investigating any corroboration between the Trump campaign and Russia is because they were investigating it.
It's because they what?
It's because they were investigating him. They can't comment on an ongoing investigation. So the very fact that they didn't say anything, the fact that we know now that they've been investigating since of last year, that's why they couldn't say anything last year.
Right, but they said something for Hillary.
They said something for Hillary because all they were doing was looking at emails. If they had looked at those emails and found something,
right,
they wouldn't have said anything, because it would have been but to just come out and just say, hey, we're looking into these emails came up, we're looking into them. And I agree with you that Comey, he did a little CYA, because if he hadn't said anything and it was so close to the election and then something had come out and Hillary had won, like everyone thought that she was going to win, then it would have looked like Comey was working by extension for the Clinton campaign.
Yeah, but that would have been following the law still, because the law says should not influence the election, I think, within the 60-day time window.
Right.
So he still would have been in compliance with the law, regardless of what it would have looked like. So
certainly. I mean, and Loretta Lynch told him not to say anything. So he went out there he certainly went out there on his own. But again, I think he was just trying to cover himself because again, everybody, and let me just say this, because people keep bringing this up every time we have a poll come out about Donald Trump and his lack of popularity or wherever he stands right now, and people keep coming out and saying, well, all the polls said that Hillary Clinton was going to win. That's not what the polls said. The polls said that that Donald Trump had like a 3 or 5 or less than a 10% chance of winning. There was no poll that came out and said Hillary Clinton had a 100% chance of winning. So, again, the fact that small, 10% chance happened does not refute the polling or the scientific nature of the polling that we do. I just had to throw that out there because I heard somebody say that this morning.
So we have a president right now who is hovering between 35 and 40%.
He's at 34% to a recent Pew poll, and I only know that because they made a point of when he fell below the 36% threshold, because Donald Trump, when President Obama fell to 36%, Donald Trump tweeted about it
exactly
and was chiding him, and now he was at 33 or 34%.
Yep. So his base is that, at this point, that means he's lost independence. The few Democrats that may have been hovering around him, he's losing support amongst them as well. So he's down to his base. So concerns me is because I see now a certain level of desperation in him. And I don't like desperate people. More importantly, I don't like desperate. That is not a good combination.
No,
because once again, there's something about America that we just find it presidential for people to drop bombs on people.
Right.
And I think we're going to see more and more of that means to distract and deter from his lack of popularity. And that's not going to be good for any of us, in my estimation.
I would agree with you. I would also take it a step further. He's going to, for whatever the FBI is investigating the Trump campaign and specifically Donald Trump for right now, the fact that he keeps making these unilateral decisions by bombing other countries or whatever he's doing, all he's doing is painting himself into a corner, and he's just painting himself more tightly into that corner. The more erratic and unpredictable that he becomes, he likes to espouse those characteristics as attributes that, hey, we've got to be unpredictable and we can't let the enemy know what we're going to do. Ultimately, he's going to order something to be done that's going to paint him so tightly into a corner that he's not going to be able to get out of it. The only reason that Moab bomb, he hasn't received more heat for that is because he gave the generals the autonomy to make that decision,
right.
Whereas before that decision had to be signed off by the president. So he's kind of taken his hands off of the military, but ultimately he's still responsible.
Absolutely. So when you talk about his unpredictability, what do you make of then the White House coming out saying that they will not release?
This is no different than Bush Cheney. If you remember at the very beginning of the very beginning of the Bush Cheney administration, then Vice President Cheney was having meetings in the White House with members of the energy industry. And those lists were kept secret. And the reason why it was such a big deal at the time was because Dick Cheney, having just been a member of Halliburton, Middle East, and they're doing all this oil development and all of this discovery of energy and so forth. So this is nothing new for Republicans. They will, I mean, that they will just look the American people in the face and just tell them, yes, we're going to make this decision, and no, we're not going to tell you who we spoke to, and get over it.
Exactly. And again, coming on the heels of what happened with Congressman Nunes and what appears to be his Trump and trying to cover up or trying to add some credence to Trump's assertion that he was spied upon or that he was bugged by the Obama administration, coming on the heels of that action that we are looking to see who he met with. I just find that very dubious that now they pick the time to say they're not going to show the visitor logs when everyone's trying to figure out who Devin Nunes spoke with. They're
trying to figure out who in the White House that he then turned around and presented to the president. Again, the Republican Party is just a cesspool of hypocrisy and mismanagement and ideological contradiction. I cannot wrap my mind around how the average, someone who is middle class or in the lower class as far as income is concerned, I will never understand how anybody from either one of those economic strata can vote Republican,
regardless of their race.
Right.
This is way beyond race.
Correct.
So again, I'm with you on that 100%. I found it funny, ironic and haha funny that the tweet came up. Trump's tweet came up when he criticized Barack Obama for being the least transparent president ever, because that's the first thing people brought up when the White House announced then that they would not be releasing their visitor logs. And how appropriate for that, just to remind him, this is what you said then. So speaking of more Trump hypocrisy, can we talk about this dude's golf swing? Is he good or, I mean, is he like really good or what's like?
I have no idea.
And here's some intersectionality. We're talking about unprofessionalism, unpresidential, unseriousness. Did you see him talking about how when they were dropping the Tomahawk missiles, how he was in Mar-a-Lago with President Xi from China, and they were eating the most wonderful chocolate cake you had ever had? What the hell was that?
On top of the fact that Mar-a-Lago just received 13 citations from the health department.
I mean, how can you talk about bombing a nation and couch it and frame it in the context of the most wonderful chocolate cake you've ever had? Those are the moments of unseriousness that I see from him. That is like, how did this guy become president?
That's not even, to me, that statement is less about him being unserious. That has more to do with he's just erratic. Definitely, but his lack of qualification he tries to obfuscate with the erratic statement. Right. I mean, almost he was making the statement saying, "I'm talking to President Xi Jinping about the bombing, and we were sitting there, and we were having the most beautiful piece of chocolate cake." I mean, right. He's intersecting that because he didn't know to say the wrong thing. He has to know at this point that he bit off more than he could chew. I mean, he has to know it.
I almost thought he was gonna go like Homer Simpson, chocolate cake. What is up with this guy? He cannot be serious. And those are the moments again during the week that I look and I'm just in utter amazement that everything is okay with this.
The Republican Party, once again.
Could you imagine if Barack Obama talked about bombing a nation, talked about chocolate cake?
Donald Trump
at his golf resort
talked about Barack Obama going golfing so much, and he's almost spent as much. He is on track to spend more money in the first year traveling back and forth between the White House and his properties than Barack Obama spent in 8. But to his supporters, to the Trump people out there, an emotional connection they have made. And when someone has made an emotional investment in a decision that they have made, no amount of facts and or logic will get that person to change their mind. It's no different than in a relationship. It's no different than in a religion. People who like Donald Trump invested in him, and people just by their nature, they've made an emotional connection, and in the presence of incontrovertible evidence that means that you should not have made that decision, you can't admit that you were wrong because then you'll look stupid.
Right. Some incontrovertible evidence. In his first 81 days, played 0 days of golf.
Exactly.
Fucking George Bush, in his first 81 days, played 0 days of golf. President Trump, 17.
Correct. He's been out of the White House once every 2.8 days or something like that.
Yes, he's averaging 1 every 3 days at a property that he owns.
That, by the way, again, something that went under the radar. As soon as he became president, the membership to join Mar-a-Lago went from $100,000 to $200,000.
Right.
That in of itself is a violation of the emoluments clause based upon which he could be impeached. Just that alone, but we have a bunch of feckless, spineless, sycophantic in both houses of Congress that are not going to do their job.
Humanity in the Headlines. You have been listening to Humanity in the Headlines. We thank you so much for joining us today as we talked about the religious right co-opting, as we talked about whatever happened to America first, and basically just a great dissection of the Trump administration in this week. And we didn't even get to Sean Spicer.
Or Kellyanne Conway.
Right, exactly. So join us next week. We will be back at the same time. We always want to thank our producer, Mr. Breon Jones. We want to thank Mr. Earl Winfrey for providing us this wonderful platform. And enjoy this beautiful weather, Chicago. Let's not shoot anybody today, all right? I'm going to put that out there.
Exactly.
Thanks so much for listening to us, and we'll see you next week.